Hello, everybody, and welcome to our February Brunch and Learn. Last month, in our January session, we took a look at some activities for face-to-face and online instruction for the GED science test. And today we are going to take a look at some activities for face-to-face and online instruction for the social studies test. My name is Jennifer Claughley, and I work out of Tri-District Adult Education, and I am the Math and Science Curriculum Specialist. And I'm very excited to turn it over to Dr. Rebecca Hannon, our Reading and Social Studies Curriculum Specialist, for some really cool activities that I know I'm really excited to do with my students.
All right, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, welcome everybody. Happy February. We are rolling right along with 2024. It's amazing to think how fast January went by. Wow. So yes, as Jennifer said, today we want to jump into the GED social studies, and we're going to pause before we get into the activities. And we're just going to take a quick look though at the test. Last month, Jennifer did an amazing job in looking at that science test. And I know for some of us veteran teachers, it's always good to kind of just, again, pause and revisit those standards, revisit the assessment guide in GED, and just make sure we are familiar with all of the context of the test. Because every now and then GED will throw us a little curveball and change things up. So we're going to do that first. And so we have some new teachers on. I'm hoping this will be very informative for you. And I'm going to show you some resources as well to kind of get acclimated a little bit more with that GED social studies test. So let's roll on. Let's see here. Okay, so again, I kind of highlighted this, but we're going to talk about the GED social studies test first. We're going to look at those topics, and then I'm going to show you guys some sample activities that I hope you guys can utilize in your classroom. That will be really helpful, not only for the social studies, but for that RLA, that reading comprehension side. So let's get on into it. All right, just a little bit about the social studies test. Very similar to the other three subtests for GED. Students are going to encounter when they take that test, they're going to be given that 70 minutes when they get in there for the GED social studies. It is the shortest test in terms of time limit and probably overall number of questions. Does not mean it's the easiest by any means. At least it's not proven to be over the course of the last few years here for us. But when they dive into that test, they're going to see majority of multiple choice questions. They're going to also have some drag and drops though, potentially some drop down questions, some hotspot questions that I think have also been coming up a lot more with some maps. So when we look at kind of the content areas of the GED test, we'll see the breakdown of geography, economics, history, so forth and so on. So we'll look at that. And then the other type of answer or question style that students will see are fill in the blank. There are a few fill in the blank that can pop up on the social studies test. So it's important to make sure our students are aware of that. One little thing here, fill in the blank. A teacher told me this a while back, and so I pass it along anytime I'm talking about the GED social studies test. If the question is fill in the blank and the answer is within the passage itself, so let's say it's manifest destiny they're talking about, students do need to spell the word right. If it's on the test and it's in that frame that they can see the question and the text, then they need to make sure they are spelling it right. Okay. Remember, the computer's great in this. So we've got to make sure we are getting all those potential points and we're making sure the computer knows what we're typing there. So just kind of pass it along to your students. Okay. All right. So now once we break down this beast of a social studies test, as I've been calling it. So approximately 50% of the test focuses on the civics and government, 20% on U.S. history, 15% on econ, and then 15% on geography in the world. And I think just kind of a realization that I've had over the course of the last couple of years is, my students, particularly my younger students, and even not necessarily younger, but our students obviously have dropped out of high school for whatever reason. And many of them they didn't get past 10th grade. If they did, they probably would have been in our high school diploma programs that we have at our adult ed sites. So if you're thinking in the course structure of a high school, 9th grade year in social studies, remember, high school students only need 3 social studies to graduate. So there's a year they usually take off, and that's usually that 9th or 10th grade year. So potentially 9th grade year, they may have saw world history, maybe world geography. 10th grade year, they may have taken off. If they did take a social studies, it's usually an elective like either the world history or world geography that they did not take in that 9th grade year, or maybe sociology, psychology. 11th grade has predominantly been reserved for United States history. And then your senior year in high school is generally when students take that government/economics course. So a lot of our students have just not been exposed to that depth of knowledge, that US history and the civics and government. Sure, maybe they were in the lower grades, but definitely not on the level that the GED is written on. So that's important to note. I mean, that's 50, 70, that's 85% of the tests that they potentially didn't get to in high school. So that's just something to kind of keep in your frame of mind there as you're going through this content. Okay, and I took this straight from GED.com, and I will show you guys, make sure everybody can access the materials here that GED.com has provided for the educators and administrators, just so you have this. But this, again, just kind of gives you the topic matrix. Those subject matters are up top. You can see civics and government is so big on the test. And then there's 2 major themes that GED focuses on, and that's the development of modern liberties and democracy, and then the societal system. So it is just all encompassing. That's what I like to say. I mean, I see their political parties for civics and government. But we're not just talking about political parties in today's nature. It may have a little bit of the Whigs, the Democrat, Republicans. I mean, it's free game, and it's a lot. History just keeps evolving on us. So it's a lot of things there, but these are the major areas to focus on. If you can kind of narrow some of these down. GED a few years ago gave out a vocabulary list of some common words that they are seeing students miss on the test, some questions and the vocabulary that appears. So I'm going to show you guys that too here in just a few, so you can have that as well. Because I think a lot of times with social studies, what I see with my students, the answer's there. And if they're a good reader, they can sometimes pull it out. But the thing that gets them is the wording of the question, and they're not understanding what the question's truly asking. And the question may have some of that vocabulary that GED expects them to know, and it would tremendously help if they knew. One word I think of commonly that students will tell me, what is popular sovereignty? And they're seeing that a lot on the test that they see. So just making sure they kind of go over some of that key vocabulary in these different fields. Okay, with the GED, here's what GED says. 50% of the test, half and half here, are going to be scenarios with 2 or 3 items per stimulus. We're familiar with these if you've been in GED a little while, and this is where you may have, a passage 1, a passage 2. Oh yes, students don't get away from that after the RLA test. Social studies test is filled with that. Usually not as rigorous of a read in terms of the length, but students are seeing a lot of that where they're having to compare passages, compare and contrast, or maybe just draw an analysis from 2 different topics that they're provided. And then the other half of the test is considered the 50% standalone items. So, and again, so you can't just focus on one area. You got to kind of mix it up with your students. Okay, and when we talk about Webb's depth of knowledge here, so the GED, 60% of the social studies test is written on level 2. Okay, so there is going to be some level 1, which are considered the easier questions. But here's the thing, and this was again eye-opening for me when I was kind of doing a deep dive. So that popular sovereignty question that my students have said they've been seeing a lot on the test. It may ask them to what is the best definition, or I'm not exactly sure how it's worded, but let's just say what is the best definition of popular sovereignty. And of course the answer choices are written in verbiage that they're not always familiar with. That would be a level 1 question. I mean, that's just a recall. To our students, that's not level 1. That's a hard question. But again, for the writers of the GED, that's a level 1. So we're talking 60% of the test on a much higher level, that skill, that concept where they are inferring, they're having to interpret, again, that compare, that cause and effect. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot that our students are having to do for this test. A GED said at one point that the social studies test is not a memorization test. And I agree with everything I've seen. However, if students have a memory of social studies and have that working timeline of American history and know when key events were triggered and the cause of this led to this and so forth and so on, that would tremendously help. So, but it's tough. We don't get our students for that long, and to teach them nearly 300 years of history is it's a big feat. So just throwing that out there. Okay. When we look at the questions on the test, we've already said 50% is going to be stimulus questions where they'll have multiple things, 2 or 3 things that will be presented at one time, and then a question based on that. 50% is standalone. We know the test is predominantly written on DOK level 2. In addition, each test item aligns with one social studies practice and one content topic. Okay, so we had those content topics, the econ, the government, civics, I should say, the US history. But then you also have these social studies practices. So social studies practices are skills that are key to reasoning in both textual and quantitative social science contexts. Now, this is where you get into, you may have a government question and it may be a definition, but then you may get a economics question and it's asking about the mean or the median. So those are the skills based. So in addition to teaching all the content, we need to look at the social studies practices, and I'm about to show you those in just a second to make sure we are addressing all the different types of skilled questions that they may ask. Okay. Other very important note, and Jennifer pointed this out last month, and I was kind of like, that makes sense, because sometimes when I look at the GED score reports, I'm wondering like, so what did you really miss on that? Well, just FYI, the GED Ready score reports, after your students take those practice GED tests, it lists the social studies practices, not content topics. So the question on the ready may have had the content of the United States history, maybe World War II, but they missed whatever the question was. It was more on the practice itself, the skill. And so the next time they see that question, they may understand that skill, but now they don't understand the content. So just, again, something else to keep in mind. And here are those social studies practices, okay? Now, I will say GED has not updated. That social studies practice number 9. If you recall, when the GED was changed in 2014, the initial new rollout included writing for both science and social studies. There was a writing portion, and I can't remember the exact year. I want to say it was around 2016. The GED took those writing pieces off of the social studies and the science test, and now students are only asked to write for the RLA test. So social studies practice 9, we'll just omit there. But here are your other social studies practices. So the big 10, making inferences. Again, that's a skill that's across the board, no matter what subject area students are seeing. So that's a big skill. Determining those central ideas. Social studies, the practice 3 here, that analyzing events and ideas. And again, that's where, to me, it's a struggle when our students just do not have that historical background. It's hard to analyze an event and place yourself in the shoes of these historians or famous figures and kind of understand what's happening there. Social studies practice 4, interpreting the meaning of symbols, words, and phrases. They a lot of that, a lot of vocab. And then you can continue seeing here purpose, point of view, integrating content presented in different ways, reasoning and evidence, analyzing the relationship between text. And then here at the bottom, you kind of see what, again, I kind of always think maybe easier for my students. Maybe it's a skill that we can really work on, and I know they can get the answers, and I feel a little bit better about that when they go to take the test. But then I get the test report back, and it's propaganda. It's analyzing a political cartoon. So it's deciphering the median, the mean, the mode. Yeah, reading and interpreting graphs, charts, other data representations, and then the statistical data set. So understanding those measures of central tendency there. So these are your practices. And again, you already know the content breakdown of the test. Okay, content knowledge. Here's, I've been saying it, right? So GED says generally familiar with social studies content and topics. Students need to be able to recognize and understand terms in context, but not in-depth knowledge is not necessarily needed. Again, I say, I question this because it would tremendously help a student if they truly understood the in-depth knowledge of each of the words that are presented on the test, the context of the terms. So also, stimuli will provide the necessary details regarding social studies related figures, events, processes, and concepts. I see this all the time, or I read online. The social studies is just a reading comprehension test. If you can read, you can get the test just fine. Okay, maybe so. And GED will say everything you need is there. Again, maybe so. But if students don't have that background knowledge, it makes it extremely hard to get the answer correct. And we know on GED, there's 4 answer choices for a multiple choice question. One of them is not all of the above or none of the above. They don't put those on there. And a lot of times we can teach test taking skills where we can get our students to narrow it down to 2 potential answers. But it's a struggle. It is a struggle because they both sound so good. I tell my students, I sometimes, when I'm looking at different practice materials, man, just glad I don't have to take the test sometimes. So, and lastly here, stimuli and answers can use specific subtopic terms, but they don't ask the test taker to come up with a definition. So again, students are not having to create anything. They're not, that's a little bit of a higher level of depth of knowledge, and they're not having to do that. So. Okay. The material that students are presented with on the social studies GED, and of course, again, we've looked at the content breakdown, you've looked at the practices, and you can see the different types of questions students will be presented on the test. The material that's presented, academic workplace context, everything that they're provided, it's basically kind of real world textual analysis, evaluation, data representation, inferencing skill, problem solving. These are skills that are across the board in all tests. So I tell my students, no matter we're working on science, social studies, reading, we've got to become better analyzers of material. We've got to really break down the material. They don't like to read the social studies because a lot of times it's written in a language that we don't use anymore, but we've got to be able to break it down, formulate conclusions based on the data that's provided. That's just inferring, that's using problem solving abilities. I will say sometimes, and I've been working with some students and the younger ones, it's a little bit harder, but sometimes you can just use your own reasoning. For some of our students, they've lived through some of this material, or maybe they haven't lived through it, but I remember one question I was working with a student the other day, and it showed a map of income distribution, and the map asked her to analyze the map and what was true, what was the true statement, or what conclusion can be drawn from the data, or something like that. And the answer ended up being the Southeast had a lower median income than the Northeast. And I mean, we kind of understand that. We talked about it, like, hey, why do people move to the South? Why are we seeing this influx of population here? Well, it's cheaper to live here. And okay, well then, so, and we just kind of talked through that. So sometimes if you just help your students just, again, the buzzword, I guess, contextualize, make it make sense for them and make it meaningful in real world context, things they know. So that sometimes helps. Again, we still have to work on that analysis and those inferencing skills. It's still a struggle. Okay, so some big things with the content, some things that GED has put out that if you're not a social studies person, these are kind of your big areas to look at. Okay. Economic events that shaped American governments, relationships between political and economic freedoms. That one is, I always kind of go with that one on the communism, socialism, democracy, market economy. So, or mixed economy, I think is the way they term it on our tests. Looking at that, what is the connection between politics and economic systems? Fundamental economic concepts. Here's where you have that idea of scarcity, opportunity cost. Those are coming in. Those are kind of like if you had an economics book, what's in chapter 1 of that economics book? That when I taught economics and I see these terms come up, I'm like, that's chapter 1. That's usually even supply and demand. Throw that in there as well. Microeconomics and macroeconomics. So with the macro side, I think a lot of things have been pushed when you're looking at that. Globalization seems to be a term that's come about on the test. International trade, tariffs, those deregulation, those types of terms are really, I'm seeing more in study guides and things like that, that's popping up. So micro, when it affects the individual, I think it's a little easier for our students to understand, but of course we've got to look at the bigger picture as well. Consumer economics, economic causes, impact of wars. So one thing with my students, and it's hard for them to relate, but I just remember it from school. War stimulates an economy. So I've seen a question like that in one of our GED prep books. And what did World War II, how did it impact the economy? Well, remember, we were in the Depression prior, and so war stimulated it. Factories had to gear up to build the arms for the war. Women had to go to work and the men went to the war. So just trying to, again, draw those connections and how did all that impact the war? Drivers of exploration and colonization, scientific and industrial revolutions. Again, how has all that impacted economics? So just a little bit of some topics. And again, this comes from GED.com. So this is some topics that they say cover with economics. The civics and government, it is large. It is very large. The modern historical governments, you do have to look at the Greeks and, their contributions to society. The different types of government systems. Monarchy is a big one to make sure they know. The Constitution, so the principles of American constitutional democracy. I mean, it's very imperative that our students know. My students have told me amendments are on there. I like to hope that it's only the Bill of Rights, but I think that it broadens to potentially all 27 of our amendments. But yeah, understanding how the Constitution came to be, even looking at the articles, the 7 articles of the Constitution, and just kind of why are they there? And of course, make sure I tell my students, if they see locked, you think life, liberty, and property, and you think natural rights. You see the lock, you go natural rights. If you see natural rights in the answer choice and you're totally stumped with everything else, you go with it. So covering those guys or covering that guy. Structure and design of U.S. government, our 3 branches of government. That's big, how they interact with each other. Just kind of the different way, the veto process and everything. That's big. Individual rights and responsibilities, political parties, campaigns, elections in American politics, and then contemporary public policy. So, I've had students say they've come back and they're like, yeah, there was a speech from Obama on the test. There was a speech about that Donald Trump made. So, you got to go back to the start and then you got to make sure you get all the way to the finish line or where we're currently at. Because it's going to be on there. All right, and then with United States history, and this kind of, a lot of this will bleed together with the civics and government, but this is where I say it's so big, and I try to just reiterate every day to my students, just a working timeline. I don't need you to remember all the dates. I don't need you to know the battles or who the major players were of each war, but just know the Civil War came before World War I and World War II, kind of have a little bit of a date. You can tell me 1800s, I'm good with that. And just kind of that little bit of a working timeline in the head, I think really helps. But looking at those historical documents that shaped American government, the revolutionary time period, the early republic, how we expanded, I think we've all seen the painting, the angel headed west, American progression there. Civil War and Reconstruction. And I think here, one thing that we've kind of highlighted over the last few weeks, the Emancipation Proclamation, and just understanding the role it played. Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery. It, came about as Lincoln, and he was promising the freedom of slaves after the ending of the war, whoever fought for the Union. Civil rights, so big there, and you can bring in those civil rights amendments, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment there. European settlement, population of the Americas, of course, the world wars, and then the Cold War. And of course, the Cold War has so many little micro wars with the Korean War, the Vietnam War, just so much there. And then also kind of making sure you do look at American foreign policy since 9/11 and some things with that. And the first Gulf War also include there. Okay, and finally, and this is probably, I'm going to say, this is going to be the topic area that I just don't cover a whole lot of, but I've had a few students come back and say, yeah, there's a map on there. I don't know. They're not labeling the maps, whether it's just the map of the United States, and then, they're asking students they don't ask them to pinpoint where a particular state is, but they have to decipher the color coding on the map and then be able to say which color associates with that state or whatnot. So they don't know the states and then the continents, knowing where the continents are, which continents are what. So with geography, you have a little bit of the development of classical civilizations, relationships between the environment and societal development, borders between peoples and nations, and then human migrations. And again, just looking at maps, making sure they can read a map. They do have a little bit of that understanding of the major, they can locate Asia on a map. I don't think they have to necessarily know where all, I think it's 200 plus countries are in the world, but having a little bit of understanding might help as well. So, all right, we're gonna keep moving. So that is it for the test itself. It's got so much on it. I love history. But man, if I didn't love history and I had to take that test, it is a lot. It is a lot on that test. So what you see right here, and this is all going to be uploaded into Brightspace. This is the assessment guide for educators, the social studies assessment guide. It is, let me see if I click it here. And Jennifer, can you just confirm with me the assessment guide? Are you seeing the assessment guide now?
Yes, I am.
Perfect, thank you. You can see the assessment guide here is 47 pages, and this is just social studies. So there is a lot in here for you to kind of look through. It breaks down again, the question types, the different performance level indicators. So if you haven't got a chance or you haven't looked at it again in a while, definitely take a look at that assessment guide. It's got that key vocabulary in there that I mentioned, things that students really need to know. Make sure some terms that they know. I'm thinking again, monopoly, opportunity cost. I'm on that economic side right now. But okay, the other big thing I wanted to share with you guys this month, Jennifer had such cool activities last month. They were, again, so I'm a social studies person. I am not a science person. And so her activities just made it fun. I don't know that my activities are going to make it fun, but I hope so. So social studies reading activities for the month. Again, this will be uploaded in the PowerPoint. You'll be able to click out, but I also am going to upload it in Brightspace as just an individual document. So you can go straight to the individual document. Okay, so in honor of Black History Month, what we've done here is we have created a calendar, a scaffolded reading comprehension, daily activity, kind of, and just reading passages and multiple choice questions on different major events, historical figures, heroes, just a gamut of different things for Black History Month. So what you're going to do, so here's the calendar, as you can see. All right, and for each one, it says over here, click the icon to learn more and complete the daily activity. So tomorrow, or I say tomorrow, I'm recording this, you may be watching this at a different time, I'm sorry, but February 1st, you're going to click on the first day here, and that is Langston Hughes' birthday. So once you click on his the picture there, you're going to be taken to an article, and it's going to detail the life and times of Langston Hughes. And you can see it's about a page long of reading. You can do this as a class. I mean, you could put this up on your smartboard and make this, larger so we could read it as a whole. You could print it off. what we try to do here is make sure each of these activities kind of stayed on 1 or 2 pages. A couple of them are about 3 pages long, but for printing purposes, if you did want to print this for your students, again, we tried to, keep that somewhat all together. But you can see the reading here on Langston Hughes. And then as you scroll on down past the reading, you're given about 10 questions for each one. Some of them have a little less, some may have a little bit more. But these are reading questions, and you're going to see as you go throughout the month, you can really utilize these questions for any of your students. I mean, some are, I guess you'd say, probably a little easier. They're more, here it is in the passage. It is what it is. It's straightforward. But some will ask students to kind of dive in, do a little bit more of the inferencing, kind of talk about the significance of the role that person may have played, or what was the contribution. It may not be listed there, drawing conclusions, so forth and so on. So you have a little bit of everything mixed into this packet here. But again, as a class on February 1st, you can do the reading. I mean, it could be a bell starter, or it could be an exit ticket. And again, although these are not necessarily all geared towards the social studies test and exactly what students are going to be seeing on that, we all know we want our students reading, and the social studies test has a lot of reading on it. The science test has a lot of reading on it. Even math, they got to be able to interpret those word problems and read what's being asked. And of course the reading test has a lot of reading. So these reading comprehension sheets, I think, can be used not only for the social studies classroom, but for your RLA classroom, science even, and even help with the math skills. So again, as a class, you can answer the questions together. You can give this to individual students. You can give it to them as homework. But at the conclusion of each daily activity, you can click right here and it will take you to the answers. Okay, so here's day 1 and here are the answer choices. Now, the one thing I failed to put in here is a back button. I might go in and add that before I truly upload. But if you scroll back up to the top again, so then your next day you're at February 2nd, and we'll click here. So this is 1976, Black History Month is federally recognized. And you have a little reading there. This one's a little bit shorter. And well, I say that actually there's a timeline in here. So it's still about a page. And then with this one, there's 7 questions. So you have 7 questions there and you can check the answers. But again, the big draw here is every day there's a different activity, a little different, I say warm up because that's what I'm going to use it for starting tomorrow. It's just a warm up in class. And I'll tell you, it was really enlightening. I'm a sports person, so I know all about Hank Aaron. I thought I did, I should say. He's local, a local Braves player here. But it was really neat to kind of look at some of these individuals and see a little bit more about their life and times. And I'll be honest, there was a few people that I didn't recognize. And so learning a little bit more there was intriguing as well. So hopefully you can, utilize this in your classroom, and it will help with the reading comprehension skills. It will also help get a little bit more of that social studies content in. The one thing that, again, as teachers, if we had more time, we only had more time. I did not go through and highlight vocabulary. That is something that over time I would like to do, because these passages are filled with some vocabulary that I think students are going to see on the social studies test, even on the reading test, or just general words they need to know. And that is something that I didn't do. Like right here, you see social justice. What does that mean? I mean, we see that term thrown around a lot, but what does it mean? So just some of those key things. Again, there is room for growth on this document, that is for sure. But you guys will have access to it. You can access it through that link on that Brunch and Learn PowerPoint, or you're going to have access to the Word document, so you can make whatever edits you can add, delete, however you feel would best suit you. So again, and if you have questions, I'm going to take it back because that is the last page of the slide there. Let me take it back to slide 1. If you have any questions on anything that was covered today in today's Brunch and Learn, or any questions on the calendar and the daily activities that are presented there, or any questions from January's Brunch and Learn. Science, as Jennifer and I were developing these Brunch and Learns for the last 2 months, we said sometimes science and even social studies kind of is the begotten subjects. We don't get a lot of attention because reading and math is so big. But yeah, any questions on the science or social studies activities that have been presented over the last 2 months, please reach out. Our emails are right here. So by all means. And that is really it. Jennifer, do you have anything that you want to add?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, but in a good way, because there is so much good stuff on that calendar that I want to make sure that I use, whether my folks are working on the social studies, GED level or not. Like there's a lot of ways I can differentiate that from my lower level readers and, all of the folks. So I'm just really excited to be able to use that. And then I just wanted to piggyback and add, as y'all are looking over these social studies activities or these science activities, if you have any ideas that you would like for us to share, we would love to add those too. And we promise we'll give you the credit. So please feel free to put your good stuff out there too, so that we can get it to everybody. But yeah, thank you, Rebecca. That was absolutely amazing. And then my final thing, just encouraging all of you guys to just look in Brightspace. There are so many trainings on there that you don't have to sit down at any particular time to do. And I just encourage you to dig into this whenever you have a chance, because there's so many good materials out there. Thank you guys so much.
Awesome. Thank you guys, and have a good February month.